Yeah, so the Anne Frank experience, how it came to Kearney High School, my work through the Institute for Holocaust Education in Omaha, Nebraska, and Kale, who is the director there for education, she reached out in late spring of last year and said, would Kearney High School be willing to host the Anne Frank exhibit? Which would be kind of the host site for other schools coming here to train, and have our students be ambassadors to be kind of the training guides for other students. And I was like, absolutely, I think this would be an incredible opportunity for our kids to serve in these leadership roles and for our students to be able to immerse themselves in the story of Anne Frank. That's a really familiar story. A lot of our classes, whether in middle school or in high school, that's one of the stories, the diaries that they read. And I thought that this would just be a really great opportunity for them to see some authentic history be brought here to central Nebraska. And then that piece of being able to train student leaders, students that have been in my Holocaust elective class, to be able to take that next step in their journey of Holocaust education. I always ask them the question, okay, now that you've learned about the Holocaust, do you feel like you have an obligation to do something about it, to act on that, to, that grandiose idea of, making the world a better place when you see atrocities happening or when you see prejudice, discrimination, those types of things. And I thought, well, this is a great opportunity for them to take what they've learned and really put that into action through education. And the students that I asked were fantastic. They jumped on board. They were all enthusiastic yeses that they wanted to participate in this. And it was really encouraging to see them not only interact with our students here at Kearney High School, but to see them interact with the students from the other schools that participated, as well as with Kale from the Institute and Mario, who traveled in from South Carolina and helped with the training as well.
Well, I think people should learn about the Holocaust mainly because while it may seem like something that people can just distance themselves from, it is actually very applicable in today's society. So because sometimes when you have a middle school or an elementary school understanding of what happened during the Holocaust, people are just like, oh, that's something that's a one-off. It happened in Germany one time because some really bad guy took over and then people died, and that's all the further they get into it. But when you kind of make parallels between Holocaust education and things going on in the political spectrum today, you can kind of see where things started emerging, because it wasn't just Hitler woke up one day and decided to kill the Jews. It was not that oversimplified. And I think that in order to prevent some sort of tragedy like this from happening in the future, I think it is the duty of our generation right now to be keeping an eye on this and making sure that when something like this is coming up, we are addressing it early and we are taking the proactive steps that are needed to make sure that everybody's in a world where they're accepted. There's no racial discrimination. Obviously that's an extreme example, but just to make sure that something like this never happens in the future and that people understand that this is something that could be repeated, and there have been multiple genocides in history. It is not just one and done. There's something that's always pertinent no matter who you are and what time you're living in. At the beginning of our training, we didn't just sit there and learn about the Holocaust. It wasn't a history class where we just sat there and we're this happened at this date, this happened at this date, this law was put into place. It wasn't really like that. We had a lot of activities where it was kind of more of acknowledging our own subtle biases and kind of just seeing how these sentiments that led to the Holocaust were kind of presented in a modern day sense. So we had activities where we were asked to judge people without knowing who they were, or we were given panels with different bad behaviors and asked to rank how bad were they, or even just trying to look at pictures and tell who was Jewish. And that was kind of, I think it was really effective in helping us acknowledge that this was something that it's not just the facts of history. It kind of got us more into knowing the mindset behind it and just figuring out that this is why it happened and this is how it could be applied today.
I'd say this experience affected me because I've never, when I took the class, I could think about it for myself, but I've never interpreted it for others, if that makes sense. And a lot of the stories about this experience were around kids our age. And so when we went to the middle schools and we got to talk to them about it, I could relate topics. There was a picture of Anne when she was 2 with her father and her sister. And I would say to the middle schoolers, during this time, the biggest thing we had to worry about was learning to ride a bike. Whereas they were dealing with the whole economic thing and being sent to concentration camps. So just to learn how to tell the story to others and kind of put it in a perspective that you can relate your own life to. I thought it was, okay, as the class, we learned about topics as a whole, but we didn't really zone in on specific lives of stories. So I thought it was cool that you'd get a walk around the whole thing and just see her life, but then you'd also get to see how the economic stuff incorporated into her life, because every other panel would be the history stuff, and then the other panels would be her life, so it'd get to like incorporate it. I don't know, I thought it was cool just to see individual stories. I know that's one story that we tend to really focus on because she's the most well-known because we have her stuff, but it also showed me how much we don't know about it.
You know, there's so many lessons that can be learned from, you know, the murder of 11 million people. You know, I remember teaching an American history class. I remember always being so, and I tell my students this, I remember being so like, hey, there's one section in this whole American history book that is dedicated to the Holocaust. And I would get really frustrated about that. And so, you know, thankfully we had a school district that was very supportive of having an elective course on this because, you know, when you talk about, again, prejudice, stereotyping, racism, discrimination, xenophobia, these are all things that are also in the here and now very present and that need to be addressed and talked about and learned about. Those things I feel are so important as far as the why study the Holocaust. It gives us that platform. I also think it's important to study the Holocaust because we need to tell the stories of those 11 million. We need to talk about the Anne Franks and the Elie Wiesels, and we need to not let their stories be forgotten because that's when it happens again and again as far as other genocides. And so for me, it's a passion of mine to, and it's important and it's meaningful and it's emotional and it's raw, but it's so very important to make sure that we continue to get that lesson out there to be heard by our students to carry on that message.